All right. So, what advice now would you give to an aspiring investor who's 6 to 12 months behind you?
You've got to start early. So if you have a goal of taking down a large scale multifamily, you got to kind of work backwards and think about what are the things that I need to be investing my time into now that are going to bear fruit for me and make it an easier transition or an easier accomplishment, whether that's 6 months, 12 months or more down the line. And so some things that you should be doing is cultivating your network and your database and refreshing those relationships.
Welcome to the Diary of an Apartment Investor podcast. I'm your host, Brian Briscoe with Four Oaks Capital. I'm very excited for today's show. It's one of our first deal series episodes, and we have Clive Davis on the line with us today, who recently closed on a 244 unit in the Atlanta, Georgia metro. We'll talk more about the deal, but just give you highlights. It's a C-class value-add asset that they purchased for $29.4 million. And Clive, you guys closed on that very recently, right?
Yeah, just last week. So we're literally a week into ownership. Yeah.
All right. Awesome. So anyway, Clive, welcome to the show, and thank you so much for being on.
Appreciate it, Brian. Thanks for having me on. I'm a listener to the show, so it's a thrill to be on with you.
Yeah, this is fun. And we connected, probably a year ago on LinkedIn, and I think we've been following each other for quite a while. So it's been fun to see, your progress and getting into this. So do us a favor. Why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself, your background and history, and what got you into multifamily?
Sure. So the professional background is I started out as a corporate transactional lawyer, working with a Wall Street firm in New York City out of law school. So I did that for a few years. Ultimately, I was a capital markets attorney. So working on debt and equity offerings, working with some of the major investment banks that you would be familiar with, and by extension, their clients. So I did that for a few years before transitioning to becoming an in-house counsel for Pfizer, who's in the news a lot these days, for good reasons. Worked for them, and they ultimately transitioned me or transferred me to Atlanta 16 years ago. And I was their regional attorney for their Southeast business. And 2 more years into that, I transitioned and became a chief compliance officer for a Belgian pharma. Did that for, all in all, about 9 years. So a 20-year corporate run before I made the full-time transition into real estate and the focus that I'm on today, which is pursuit of large-scale multifamily.
Nice. So what prompted that transition? I mean, you had a really good career, it sounds like. I mean, you had long stints with businesses. So obviously you were doing well, for them to keep you and keep on moving up through the chain. But what prompted the move from practicing law to multifamily?
Yeah, so I, from throughout most of my corporate life, I have invested in real estate, kind of peripheral to my 9-to-5 day job. So it was never anything that I was reliant on as a source of income. It was never anything that was kind of primary focus for me. But it's something that I've always had kind of my fingertips on, and had an appreciation for. And, after 20 years, I basically just got to the point where I said, if not now, when? So at the time that I left corporate life, I was I think I was 45, 46. And I had always flirted with being an entrepreneur of some sort. And even when I went to law school, I didn't necessarily intend to practice traditionally. I always had kind of an aspiration of being some sort of an entrepreneur. And then because of my interest in real estate, those two kind of combined to suggest, hey, maybe you need to give something a shot in this space. And after putting in 20 years, you're right, I had done well. I was doing well. I reached a level where I was highly compensated. But as I told someone literally 30 minutes ago, you cannot pass on a high income to your children and grandchildren.
True.
So you can be highly compensated today, and tomorrow you can go in and they can say, Brian, well, we appreciate your service. We're going in a different direction, and we no longer have a need for you or your role. And so it's nice to be highly compensated, but that is not how you create generational wealth. And that's something that is really important to me.
Yeah, I like that. I like how you phrase that. You can't pass a high income to your children and grandkids. That's and there's nothing wrong. I spent 20 years in government. And I just transitioned from military to entrepreneurship, and that's the same thing in just about every job. I mean, you get to the point to where you're making a good income, and I have a pension now, which is in a way kind of archaic, but I still cash the checks every month. I can't pass that on. I can pass it on to my wife. She'll get 55% of that, but nothing goes to kids and grandkids. But building assets, building real estate, building a business, having shares and stuff like this, you can actually pass on. So I love that. Thank you for making that point. That's something I think everybody knows in the back of their heads, but I'm glad you articulated it. So how did you find that transition? I mean, what challenges did you have moving from corporate law into the entrepreneurship of multifamily?
So the first thing that you've got to do is recognize and embrace that you've got to step outside your comfort zone. When you've been in the corporate world, or for you, the military, for a couple of decades, that is a world that you're very comfortable in. And you tend to flourish in a place where, it's a comfort zone. And it becomes a comfort zone because you're doing things repetitively and without giving a lot of thought, because, you're comfortable by definition.
Absolutely.
And so when you embrace the transition from that to the unknown, and for me, kind of, large scale multifamily in this world at that time was an unknown. And so you got to get comfortable with, I am going to kind of, flop around a little bit while I kind of get my sea legs under me and figure out this new terrain that I'm navigating. You know what your destination is, but, before you can reach your destination, you got to feel uncomfortable. And so that was the first thing. And so, in many respects, you're learning a new language. And so, the language of multifamily, while I always say real estate is fairly simple, but it's not necessarily intuitive. And so you've got to get exposure to the space. You've got to be in conversations and around people who are speaking the language, and you've got to learn the language and become proficient in the language. And so all of that is forcing you to exercise muscles that you may not have had to exercise in whatever it is that you were doing previously. And so that's part of that discomfort that you got to embrace and take on. And so, as you get to the point of starting to talk to brokers and networking and being able to, again, talk the language and sound like you know what you're talking about, and not, embarrassing yourself because you're not, speaking the language correctly, or your language is full of grammatical errors, and you're like, okay, he's not from here. He must be new in town. And so, all of that transition just requires you to humble yourself and say, whatever level of success you've had in a prior life, that doesn't automatically transfer or translate into the new space. And so you got to be comfortable with that. And that requires a little bit of humility, and which is fine. I generally think of myself as a fairly humble guy. And so, that's part of the transition. But one of the things that I did early on was focus on, what is it that I want to do? Who's doing what I want to do, and how do I put myself in proximity to them, and how do I start networking and putting myself in networks where there are folks who are doing exactly what it is that I want to do. And so that was part of the journey.
All right. Now there were a lot of pearls of wisdom there. I started keeping track and, mentally, but just a lot to unpack. But you said a lot of things that were very profound. I mean, the first steps into multifamily, regardless of what career you come from, are like first steps in anything, clumsy and awkward, and you fall down a lot, and you got to push through it. And that's the same for everybody. I mean, you were a corporate attorney 20 years. I was active duty military for 20 years, and we both had the same. It's true of most everybody. They have the same experience when they're moving into a different field, just because it's unfamiliar. And I like what you said, towards the end there as well, where to be able to mitigate that, you started looking for people who were doing what you want to do and finding ways to get around them. So if you would, I'd like to talk about that just a little bit more before we get into your first deal. How did you find these people? Where did you find these people, and what did you do to get around them?
Yeah, so when I first left corporate life, one of the things that I started to do is, so first I said, I believe in commercial real estate and primarily focused on multifamily. So one of the first things I did is I said, okay, I'm not leaving my money in those kind of legacy 401ks. I want to get my money out of the stock market, and I want to put the money into a space that I believe in and that I'm now transitioning into. And so I began to invest in large scale deals with institutional quality sponsors. And for me, I did that through one of the crowdsourced platforms that's opened up to accredited investors. And beyond kind of the expected return on my investment for any of these deals that I invested in, that was also a form of my education, because it gives you a firsthand look at what is it to be an investor from that perspective, investing in one of these deals. What does good look like? Or not, and how are they structuring their deals? And so I tended to focus on the types of deals that I aspired to do one day. I didn't know when I would be doing them, whether that would be 12 months, 18 months, 24 months, whatever. I tended to focus on the deals that I aspired to do in the markets that I felt were attractive for a variety of reasons. And so I started doing that. So that got me exposure to some sponsors. So that was one piece of it. And then the other thing, beyond kind of the general education of, podcast listening, books, and attending conferences, when I was in corporate life, the only conferences I attended are the ones that were work related, that my job was paying me to attend. But now I found myself with having time. And so I started attending, this is pre-COVID, I started attending conferences that were real estate, multifamily focused, syndication, that type of thing. And it was on my dime. And that put me in direct contact with people who were like-minded, who believed in multifamily, who were investing in multifamily, and in many instances were leading their own deals. And so that put me in close proximity with people right out the gate. So those are some of the steps. And then finally, I decided to join a multifamily mentoring program. And, I checked out a few, higher profile folks kind of providing education in the space. And then ultimately, I decided on one group and parachuted in. And right away, you're in close proximity to people who 100% believe in the benefits of passively and actively investing in multifamily. And you almost are buying into a club almost, or a network. And then from there, you're able to develop those one-to-one personal relationships where you start to get to know people, like them, and trust them, and really develop solid relationships.
Absolutely. And I think that's a really solid recipe for success. I mean, you passively invested first, which does a lot for you. You get to know the sponsors, you get to know deals, you get to know markets, but you get to know things from an investor mindset as well. So you know what investors are looking for, and you probably learned a little bit about the questions that investors have going into deals. You started going to these big conferences, putting yourself around the sponsors, and then the paid mentorship. I think I did a paid mentorship program as well. And just the people that put me around is worth the cost. A lot of people look at that cost and they're like, am I going to pay that much? But I think just the connections I made through that mentorship program were worth the price of admission. So thanks for sharing all that. And once again, really solid blueprint for getting around the right people. Now, before we get into the first deal, talking about this deal, one question I ask everybody, and I'd love to hear, your answer to this. What is your big burning why?
Sure, and I think I alluded to it earlier, but for me, it's really two components, and they're interrelated. So the first piece is freedom, and so I mentioned earlier that you can be highly compensated, but your time is not your own, and you're kind of hired out, and your time is someone else's. So for me, freedom is really key and a key component for the path that I'm on now. Mm-hmm. And then related to that is the creation and generation of true generational wealth. So, mm-hmm. And when I talk about that, I mean, lots of people use the phrase, but when I talk about that, I'm talking about creating wealth that my not yet conceived grandchildren will experience and be impacted by. Yeah. And so, I don't care how highly compensated you are, you cannot pass on high income. Mm-hmm. For me, real estate, when I kind of assess people that have been successful throughout American history, I can't think of too many of them where real estate hasn't played an integral role in their wealth and wealth that they've passed down the generations. Yeah. And so I want to, that's never been done in my family. I'm first generation college, and I want to be first generation or the first in my family to create generational wealth that, again, my grandchildren will be impacted by and experience.
Yeah, I love it. I love it. Yeah, and I have many yet to be conceived grandkids as well that I want to be able to impact as well. And a lot of what you said definitely resonates with me. Some very key things right there. Be that person that makes the impact. Be the person that makes the change in the history. So very much appreciate that. Well, let's start talking deal specific stuff. And when we talk about deal specific stuff, first thing I want to highlight here is the team that you were with. So let's talk first about your team. One person can very rarely tackle a 244 unit, by him or herself. But if you go ahead and tell us about the team that came together to put this deal together.
Yeah, so if you're going to play in this space, I don't care what your resources are, experience, or what have you. If you're going to be successful, you're going to increase the likelihood of success if you surround yourself with people and a team that is there to support you and kind of take up some of the slack and play different roles, because this space, as Brian, has very distinct roles, and I don't know of the one person who can do them all well, so you got to surround yourself with a team. So for me, I had two primary partners on this deal that we just closed, and one is based in Houston, one is based in Dallas, and I'm the boots on the ground here in Atlanta. So, I kind of quarterbacked the deal, but they brought a ton of value to everything that I was doing. They brought experience to the table because both of them have syndicated multiple deals themselves. So they brought that experience to me. They obviously brought their networks to the deal as we kind of transitioned into capital raising for the deal. And so it's really been a true team effort to get this across the finish line. And I would extend that to kind of our lender and our insurance broker and our tax consultant. And all of these folks are folks who I consider to be part of our team, because without any one of those roles being played, I'm not sure we could be successful.
Yeah. Now, where did you meet these members? Did these come from the mentorship group or one of the conferences you attended?
So absolutely. So the mentorship group that I joined, I met both these individuals in that group, and we've been kind of plotting and planning and pursuing opportunities for some time now. And, finally got this breakthrough. But, earlier you talked about the investment in yourself and kind of the investment in these mentorship programs. And my thinking all along was, the ROI on this investment, if I do one deal, that will more than pay for this investment. And so, I think, that for me, it's really paid off, in multiple ways, both in terms of the individuals that I'm partnered with that I would not have necessarily connected with, but for, my membership in this group, and ultimately in this deal that we're going to talk more about.
Nice. Now, something you mentioned, and I get a lot of questions about this. I mean, you were in the mentorship group, and you talk about partnering with people who already had experience. What did you bring to the table? I mean, what did you have to offer these guys that made them think, I like this Clive guy. I want to be one of his partners, or I want him to partner with us on stuff.
Yeah. So I've always, well, not always, but I've positioned myself as, first of all, I've got boots on the ground in a very dynamic market that is a
hot market,
strong multifamily market. So for each of them, they have done deals in Texas, in San Antonio, DFW, Houston, Arkansas, St. Pete, Florida, but they'd never entered the Georgia market, and specifically the Atlanta market. So that was my kind of first positioning, is that I can pursue opportunities and bring them for us to assess. And that's from sourcing the deal, touring the deal, developing the relationships on the ground with brokers, all of the things that you need to do, is you're familiar with, Brian, to get these opportunities. That's what I was offering up. And so I underwrote the deal. I did all of the things that are necessary, and then made recommendations as this is what we should be offering on this deal. This is what's attractive about this deal. And so basically eliminated the need for them to be in the Atlanta market, but still, nonetheless, they're able to benefit from opportunities in the market because of my presence here. I think my background as a corporate transactional lawyer kind of gave them a sense of what I was capable of doing, and what I could apply to the multifamily space. And so for a lot of reasons, there were synergies, and it's really worked out well.
Nice. And I think your background as an attorney really helped. I mean, you started at the very beginning talking about working in the securities industry and whatnot. So you definitely had a lot of, good, solid experience that would indicate that you're a good person to work with. You're in the metro, you're able to underwrite the properties, you're able to walk the properties, make those relationships. And I would agree that does make you an absolutely valuable partner in anything, especially in the Atlanta area. All right. So specifically on this deal, let's talk about how you found the deal.
Yeah. So it was, I hear about these unicorn off-market properties, but I've yet to wrestle one of those to the ground. So this one was a publicly marketed, fully marketed opportunity by one of the big brokerage firms. And so I learned about it. I underwrote it. I jumped in the car. I drove the property. I got familiar with it real quick, and started pursuing it aggressively. But it was offered on by many others who pursued it, and we were able to wrestle it to the ground.
Yeah. How did you make your offer stand out, or how did you make your offer competitive? I mean, was there something additional you guys put in? Did you guys put a higher price in? Earnest money deposit, higher deposit? What do you think made your offer the one that the owners accepted?
It's a great question, and now that we're closed, I should probably, because I do know the sellers, I should probably go back and ask them what put us over the top. But yeah, I think when I underwrite and when I put in an offer, and I just did this yesterday, beyond kind of the LOI itself, I like to give the seller a sense that I have done a little bit more than all of the other offers that they're receiving. And so I like to put more thought into what is our business plan? What are we going to do to the property? How are we going to elevate it or take it to a different level than where it is today? So I tend to put a lot of thought into that and try and convey that in the accompanying email, or if I get to the point of a buyer interview, I try and convey that I'm, first of all, I'm here, I'm on the ground, I have an interest and a knowledge in the market and submarket. This isn't just another deal that I'm phoning in. This is something where, I have a connection to, because, Atlanta is home for me. Yeah. So we have a lot of kind of non-Georgia based buyers who are pursuing opportunities here. And I think, one way of differentiating yourself, if that's your truth, is to be able to say, look, I'm here, I'm in the community, and I have an interest in how this community does and this community doing well. And so I try and surround my offer with some of those intangibles that not every buyer or institutional buyer is going to be able to convey, or at least authentically convey.
No, I think that's smart. It obviously worked for you, but just thinking off the cuff, when you add those extra details in there, it shows to the sellers and to the brokers that you have absolutely done your homework, so you know exactly what's entailed, which gives them a little more confidence going forward with you, that you guys aren't going to back out during due diligence, because you've put the effort in to understand the property, understand the market, understand the neighborhoods. So a lot of that risk is taken off the table. And the other thing I was thinking of as you were explaining is, if the seller has an emotional attachment to the property, if you're showing, hey, this is what we're going to do to make it better. I think I've heard a lot of cases where the sellers are like, I like those guys because they're going to treat the property like I want it treated, in a lot of ways, because, I know it is a business, I know you're not supposed to get emotionally attached, but we're humans. And we do, so if you can convey that to a lot of sellers, you may just be pulling on that right string that says, I want to sell this to somebody who's going to, whether they state it, verbally or not, subconsciously, a lot of these guys are thinking, I want to sell this to somebody who's going to take care of the asset, just like we've taken care of it. So I think there's a lot of wisdom in what you said there. So 244 units, $29 million purchase price. How much money did you guys have to raise for this?
So we raised just about $8.25 million in equity.
Okay. All right. Any big lessons learned from the capital raise?
So lessons learned from the capital raise, a few. So I connected and reconnected with individuals I had not been in touch with since I graduated law school. So one of my early investors was a law school classmate of mine who literally we had not communicated since we graduated. We have a friend in common that we're both in touch with, and that common friend had told this other friend, hey, you know what Clive's up to, and he said, yeah, I'd love to hear, give him my number. And so we connected in that way, and he turned out to be one of my largest investors. And the lesson for me is that the relationships and the reputational equity that you have developed over the years can be tapped into, for the purpose of raising capital for one of these deals. And so a lot of times you're feeling like, oh man, and I was even feeling this, I've not spoken to him in so many years. I can't share a deal with him. He's going to be like, why are you reaching out to me? We haven't spoken in years. And we got on the phone and we started talking and chatting and texting like we had, never skipped a beat. And the lesson for me in that is that, in all of our careers and journeys, we've developed relationships along the way. And you've got to recognize that, assuming that you generated, quality, meaningful relationships and connections, those connections don't expire just because you're not in the same circles or not having the same level of communication that you once did. And so if you're in capital raising, you've got to reach deep back into your network, and you never know, where that capital is going to come from.
I experienced a lot of the same things, being active duty, I've moved, 10 times in a 20-year military career. And it's almost like every position, every seat in an organization is a revolving door. I moved on average every 2 years, but guess what? Every single seat in the entire organization, every organization I was in was the same. And so there's people that I was with for a year here or 6 months there, or maybe a full 2 years at another location. Some of these guys caught wind of what I was doing, and this is where social media is powerful. Some of these guys got caught wind of what I was doing and reached out to me. There's people who've invested with us that I haven't seen in a dozen years. But I think you're absolutely right. That relationship that you had with them 12 years ago, it may not be top of mind, but it's still there, and you can still tap into that. And I think there's a lot of power with that. So let's talk real quick about closing the property. Talk about finding. We talked about the capital raise. Let's talk about some of the lessons learned and maybe some of the big challenges you guys had to overcome, getting to the closing table.
Yeah. So fortunately, I don't really have any big challenges or unexpected twists and turns that occurred. I think of it, and I come from a transactional world, and so I tend to think of it as being, in relatively speaking, a smooth transaction. Even the closing got pushed back a little bit. And that was primarily based upon kind of just the backlog of loans in our lenders pipeline. And, that was something that everyone on all sides of the table understood, the selling broker, the seller, so it wasn't a situation where, that was being viewed as something that kind of fell at our feet. It's just the reality of the market. So we kind of took that in stride, but it was fairly a smooth transaction. But I credit that to the team that I had the pleasure of being surrounded by, because with different team members, that could have been a very different story. I know we, just focused on the insurance for a second. We had a quote that we were running with that we thought was what we were going to be able to underwrite to and close on. And short story, we had to switch horses in terms of our insurance broker and coverage. And ultimately, I'm really happy with who we were able to go with, because that's someone who's kind of been supporting me in this journey, for the 1 to 2 years that I've been pursuing deals. And so we ended up having to switch horses, switch lanes kind of at the last minute. So that created a little bit of anxiety, but again, you surround yourself with solid people who are committed to getting the deal done. You're going to get it done, and hopefully without too many heart palpitations along the way.
And one more key that you mentioned there, our first closing, we had, it seemed like everything was a speed bump. It seemed like every time the broker would ask for anything or the bank would ask for everything, it was a speed bump. But, we've closed on 9 deals, and now we're advising a group through another deal in Augusta, Georgia, actually pretty close to where you're at. But, if you have that experience, you're able to, what they're going to ask for, because the lenders are asking for the same things almost every transaction. The closing attorney is asking for the same things almost every transaction. The brokers, everybody involved, they're doing their cookie cutter. This is what we need for your insurance quote. This is what we need for your loan. This is what we need to close. And if you have the experience, you can anticipate a lot of that. You know what's coming up, and you can be ready for it. And I think that's one of the biggest values of jumping on with an experienced team already, is you don't have to learn by stumbling through that experience. So you closed last week. Tell us how, what you guys have done so far, what you did for that transition of ownership up till now. Obviously, you're 7 days into it, so it's not going to be a whole lot.
Yeah, so for the most part, I've been kind of staying out of our property management companies here and allowing them to kind of facilitate the transition. And I think I mentioned to you earlier, so we'll have our first kind of formal conversation with our property manager after I get done with this conversation. But really, one thing I would say is that we focused early on in terms of key personnel that we wanted to secure for the property. And fortunately, we had a relationship with the seller such that they were very comfortable sharing with us, this individual is an asset, this individual is an asset, and you would do well to keep them in place and secure. And so we kind of were early into that, even before we closed the deal. And so that's important. And I have a new appreciation for the importance of that. And my partner is routinely says that 70 or 80% of the success of any deal is going to come down to the property management. Yep. And so we made that a priority early on. And so we're only a week in, but already I've developed personally a relationship with the on-site property manager, such that we can text and we can call one another. And I think all of that will continue to pay dividends throughout the life of the ownership of the property. So it's still early. We're 6 or 7 days in, but we're off to a good start. We've already identified that our pro forma rents turned out to be very conservative. Nice. I think across many of the floor plans, we're going to be able to hit those pro forma rents even without picking up a hammer. So nice. It's early days, and all of that needs to be proven out, but it's looking very promising.
Awesome. Well, good luck as you guys transition. I think I say good luck because it's just what people say, but every time I say that, I remind myself that you make your own luck, and it sounds like you guys are well postured to succeed. So good luck in the sense that I know you guys are going to make your own good luck and good fortune. So so that said, what's next for you?
Yeah, what's next for me is more of the same. I'm actively pursuing additional opportunities. Just yesterday, I submitted an offer and am hoping to hear today or tomorrow whether or not we were able to get awarded that deal and get that under contract. I've told the brokers who sold us the deal that we closed on last week, I conveyed to them, they took me out to lunch and I conveyed to them that I would like to do, 3 or 4 of these deals a year. And, that's music to their ears. And, I put it out there because, if you're going to manifest anything, you've got to speak it into being and into fruition. So I want to definitely do more of these deals. And I envision that at some point, I'm going to take on some development opportunities. My partner is a pretty proficient developer himself, in addition to the syndication deals that he does. And so, he's been trying to convince me that we can do the same here in Georgia that he's doing in Dallas and in other markets. And so that's something that's probably on the horizon, probably after I get a few more of these deals under my belt. And, we'll look at that opportunity. Awesome. Now, I understand you also run a Facebook group as well. Can you tell us a little bit about that? Yeah, it's the African American Multifamily Investor Network, and it's interesting how that came about. I think myself, one of my partners, and a few others attended one of these real estate conferences, and we connected with some other folks there at the conference, and then we started communicating via email afterwards. And someone said, man, this is really cumbersome. We need a platform, or we need a group, or we need something where we can kind of share with one another. And I took that and ran with it and set up this group. And really the idea is, I know I'm a member of probably 24, if not more, multifamily related groups. But one of the things that I recognize is that, African Americans in commercial real estate specifically are woefully underrepresented. And I think the figure is something like less than 2% are African Americans in the commercial real estate space. So I really wanted to curate a space where, folks with a similar background who didn't necessarily grow up having exposure or proximity to commercial real estate, folks could have kind of a safe space where they could learn the language, learn from other folks who are doing what it is that they may not be familiar with and may not believe is possible for them, because they don't necessarily see, or they haven't necessarily seen individuals who look like them or come from similar backgrounds doing, large scale multifamily. Now we have folks in the group who, their aspiration is, I just want to buy my first duplex, and that I want that to be my first real estate purchase, or I want to buy a single family and I want to BRRRR it. We have folks on that end of the spectrum, and then we have folks on the opposite end of the spectrum who are closing, transactions with 1,300 plus units in one deal. So that's really what that was about. And, we welcome all folks into the group who can add value to the group. And we have folks playing all kinds of roles across the commercial real estate spectrum. So really happy with the group. It's up to 1,100 folks right now and continues to grow.
All right, and I'll put a link to that in the show notes. It sounds like an amazing group, and I think there's a lot of things I'd reiterate as well. One of the first things I noticed in my first big real estate conference is exactly what you noticed: the lack of diversity. There was not a lot of diversity, and I applaud you for doing what you're doing and making sure that other people know that they can do it as well. It's open to everybody. It's just that for some reason, not everybody's jumped in to this market yet. So
exactly right.
All right. So what advice now would you give to an aspiring investor who's 6 to 12 months behind you?
Yeah, a few things come to mind. I would say that you've got to start early. So if you have a goal of taking down a large scale multifamily, you got to kind of work backwards and think about what are the things that I need to be investing my time into now that are going to bear fruit for me and make it an easier transition or an easier accomplishment, whether that's 6 months, 12 months or more down the line. And so some things that you should be doing is cultivating your network, cultivating your, I won't say Rolodex, because
who knows what that is anymore, right?
Aren't familiar with the Rolodex, but cultivating your network and your database and refreshing those relationships. So I talked about, the importance of, if you're going to engage in capital raising and none of these deals get done without capital being raised, you've got to be laying the groundwork for that time when you're going to pick up the phone or send out that note or meet in person. You don't want the first time that person that's sitting across from you, you don't want that to be the first time they're hearing about what you're doing in real estate. So you've got to be building your brand. You've got to be planting the seeds within your network that, hey, I'm now doing this, and you need to be sharing with them and touching them, over that 6 months, so that when you finally reach out to them and say, hey, remember what we've talked about the last 2 or 3 times that we've chatted? I've got one of those deals now, and you may want to take a look at it. You may be interested. And so that cultivation of your network is critical. And I didn't appreciate the importance of it as much when I was in corporate life, but in real estate, relationships and network are everything. And I would say invest your time there.
Yeah. I think that once again, you've thrown out a lot of pearls during this entire episode. And just reiterate one more thing, especially capital raising, start early. Start early. And one thing that I've adopted is I'm always in a capital raising mode. I'm always looking for people who are interested in investing, because, we may or may not have an active deal right now, but still I'm always looking for somebody who's interested to bring them into the fold, because, once you're under contract, you have a very limited amount of time to get people into the deal. All right, now we are almost completely out of time, and I know you got the call with your property manager coming up. So last question, how can our listeners learn more about you?
Sure, I'm active on LinkedIn, I'm active on Facebook, so you can find me on those platforms. Email, if you reach out to me, Clive, CLIVE, @parkroyalcapital.com. You can get me. I freely give out my phone number, which is 770-366-4093. I'm pretty responsive, whether you're reaching out to me via LinkedIn or Facebook or email. I generally pride myself on getting back to you, even if it's to say, I got your message, let's set up a call or let's set up a time to talk.
Perfect. And we'll have links to the email and to your LinkedIn profile and your phone number in the show notes. So anybody who's interested in reaching out to Clive, please do, or just ask to join his community on Facebook as well. With that said, Clive, thank you so much for coming on the show. You added a ton of value, a lot of, like I said, pearls of wisdom that came out in this episode. And I very much appreciate your time.
Appreciate being on, Brian. Thanks so much.